The rain came down in sheets that Tuesday night, drumming against the windows of the roadside diner like a restless heartbeat. The neon sign outside flickered in tired protest, half the letters burned out, the rest buzzing with a dull red glow that washed the cracked vinyl booths in an eerie light. The place smelled of burnt coffee and fried onions, the kind of scent that clung to your clothes long after you left. Behind the counter moved Clara Morgan, 25 years old, but already carrying the posture of someone twice her age. She slid plates across chipped Formica refilled mugs with stale coffee, and offered tired smiles that never quite reached her eyes. Each movement was efficient, mechanical, as if she had rehearsed this routine 1,000 times before. She wasn't thinking about the weather or the truckers slumped in the corner booth. Her thoughts were somewhere else, on the bills stacked high on her kitchen table. On her younger brother Ethan lying in a hospital bed, 2 towns over, tethered to machines she couldn't afford. Every hour she worked here barely scratched the surface of what the doctors demanded. That's when she noticed him. A man in a tailored gray suit sat alone near the back, his presence somehow out of place among the grease-stained menus and sticky floors. He hadn't ordered more than a cup of black coffee, untouched and cooling at his elbow. His gaze was fixed on the rain-washed glass, like he was searching for something out there in the dark. When he finally stood to leave, the bell above the door gave a hollow chime, and the night seemed to swallow him. Clara sighed, reached for the bill he had left on the table, far too generous a tip for 1 cup of coffee. And that's when she saw it, a wallet, sleek, black leather, heavy. It had slipped from his coat unnoticed, lying there, like a secret meant to be discovered. Clara picked it up, her fingers brushing against the smooth leather. The weight of it was startling, almost ominous. She glanced around. No one else had seen. The cook was busy in the back. The truckers were lost in their own half-drunken stories. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Stacks of crisp $100 bills stared back at her. Neat, thick, impossibly real. More money than she had ever held in her life. Enough to buy time, enough to pay for Ethan's next round of treatment, enough to finally breathe. Her breath caught sharp and ragged as the rain hammered harder against the glass. The temptation struck fast, cruel, whispering to her like the devil himself, "No one will know. He's rich. He won't even miss it. Maybe this is the universe finally giving you a break." But another voice stirred inside her, the echo of her father's words, long gone now, but never forgotten. All you truly have in this world, Clara, is your name and your word. Don't ever sell either one cheap. The diner around her seemed to fade, leaving only the storm, the cash, and the weight of a choice that could alter everything. What is your integrity worth when no one is watching? The city was almost unrecognizable at 3 in the morning. Park Avenue stretched before Clara like a canyon of glass and steel. Its skyscrapers silent, its streets washed clean by the storm. Her old Chevy rattled as she pulled to the curb, looking impossibly out of place among the sleek black sedans and doormen in pressed uniforms. Clara sat there for a moment, both hands gripping the steering wheel. The wallet lay on the passenger seat, its weight heavier than stone. Every instinct told her to turn back, to pretend she never saw it. But she had already made her choice. With a deep breath, she slid the wallet into her apron pocket and stepped out into the cold, wet air. The doorman's eyes narrowed the moment he saw her damp waitress uniform, her tired shoes, her uncertainty. She held out the wallet, voice trembling. "Excuse me. I believe this belongs to a Mr. Samuel Cross." He left it in the diner. The man looked at her with suspicion, sharp enough to cut. But before he could answer, a voice rose from deeper inside the lobby. "That won't be necessary, Robert." Clara froze. From the hallway emerged Samuel Cross himself, no longer in his armor of a business suit, but in dark trousers and a gray sweater that did nothing to soften the authority in his presence. His hair, perfectly kept earlier, now fell slightly out of place. But his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were as sharp as a blade. "You're the waitress," he said flatly. It wasn't a question. Clara swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. You dropped this." She extended the wallet like an offering. He didn't take it. Not yet. He just stared at her, assessing, dissecting, as though she were a line item on a balance sheet. When he finally accepted it, his touch was brief, his inspection swift. He counted nothing, but his gaze lifted back to her, colder now. "All right," he said, voice low. "How much?" Clara blinked. "What?" "The finder's fee. Your reward. What's your price?" His words landed like a slap in the face. Her stomach twisted. The long night, the storm, the battle with temptation, all reduced to this insult. For a heartbeat, shame burned in her chest. Then something else rose, something fierce. She lifted her chin. "My price," she said evenly, her voice steady despite the storm raging in her veins, "is nothing. I'm not here for a reward, Mr. Cross. I'm here because it's your wallet, and decent people return what isn't theirs." For the first time, his expression shifted. A flicker, surprise, maybe even discomfort, but it vanished as quickly as it came. His eyes narrowed, unreadable. "Nobody does anything for nothing, Miss Morgan," he murmured. Then after a long silence, he added, "I know who you are." The word sent a chill through her. "What do you mean?" Cross's lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "Clara Morgan, NYU business student. Dean's List 4 semesters. Dropped out 2 years ago when your younger brother fell ill. You've been working nights at that diner ever since." Clara's blood ran cold. How did you?" "I don't get to where I am by being uninformed," he interrupted. "The moment I realized my wallet was missing, I had my head of security pull footage from the diner's exterior cameras. Facial recognition database, cross-references. It didn't take long." Her breath caught. "So this—" "Yes," Cross said, his voice clipped. "A test. A ridiculous suggestion from my chief of operations meant to prove that integrity still exists somewhere in this city. I didn't believe anyone would pass. But you did." He slipped a card from the wallet and held it between 2 fingers. "Be at my office tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock sharp." Clara stared at the card as if it might burn her. "A job," she whispered. "Not just a job," Cross replied, his tone like steel. "I want you to take charge of a failing community project. 6 months. A $500,000 budget. If you succeed, you'll never pour coffee again." The lobby seemed to tilt around her, the rain outside beating against the glass, like applause from another world. Clara Morgan, waitress, was being offered something that sounded like madness, an impossible chance from a man who trusted no one. She clutched the card in trembling fingers, unable to speak. Her silence was the only answer she had, as her world shifted beneath her feet. The Riverside Community Initiative sat at the edge of the city like a forgotten relic. Once meant to be a beacon of hope, it now looked more like a tombstone to broken promises. The roof sagged under years of neglect, rainwater dripping through cracks in the ceiling onto warped gym floors. The air was thick with mildew and dust, carrying the faint odor of old sweat and spoiled food. Faded murals of children's handprints lined the walls, ghosts of optimism long since abandoned. Clara stood at the entrance, clutching the thin folder Cross's office had given her. $500,000 in budget, a title she had never imagined, and an assignment to breathe life into something already halfway to the grave. Her thrift store blazer felt too big, her shoes pinched her feet, and her nerves buzzed louder than the flickering fluorescent lights above her. She was met by Margaret Hayes, the project's longtime director, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair pulled tight into a bun, and eyes that had seen too many promises broken. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set. "So you're the one they sent to shut us down," Margaret said, voice sharp with suspicion. Clara shook her head quickly. "No, I'm here to save it. Mr. Cross wants." Margaret cut her off with a short, humorless laugh. Save it. Honey, people like him don't save places like this. They strip them for parts and sell what's left. Don't think for a second I don't know why you're here. The words landed heavy. Clara tried again, her voice firmer this time. I'm not him. I'm not here to bulldoze what's left. I want to help. But the suspicion in Margaret's eyes didn't fade. Around the center's staff and volunteers stole glances at Clara, their expressions wary, even hostile. To them, she wasn't a savior. She was an outsider, another corporate pawn sent to deliver the final blow. Her days quickly became an endless barrage of obstacles. The building's finances were chaos, invoices, stuffed in shoeboxes, handwritten ledgers impossible to decipher. Requests for even minor expenses had to pass through Victor Lane Cross's chief operating officer, a man whose polished smile never reached his calculating eyes. Victor made his presence felt from the very first call. Clara, he drawled over the phone, his tone dripping with condescension. You'll need to resubmit your purchase order. Again. Wrong form, you see? And this time, don't forget line 17 subsection B. Compliance is everything. Every step forward was followed by 2 shoves back. The ovens she requested for the community bakery were delayed. The laptops for the after-school program mysteriously vanished from the shipment. Funds she thought were approved were suddenly frozen. And in board meetings, Victor's ridicule was merciless. A waitress running a community initiative, he'd say, smiling at the executives around the table. What could possibly go wrong? Each jab stung, but Clara bit her tongue, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her crack. Still, the weight pressed heavier with each passing week. One night, long after the staff had gone home, she sat alone in her small, drafty office. The only light came from a desk lamp, casting shadows across the stacks of unpaid bills and rejected forms. Rain tapped against the window, echoing the same rhythm that had haunted her the night she found the wallet. Her hands rubbed over her tired face, and for the first time since this began, she whispered into the silence. Maybe I was a fool to think I could do this. The words hung in the empty room, fragile as glass, threatening to shatter her resolve. The center was quiet that night, too quiet. The volunteers had gone home, the echo of children's laughter long faded down the dim hallways. Only the soft hum of an old refrigerator and the dripping of a leaky pipe kept Clara company as she sat at her desk, drowning in paperwork. Bills, more bills, broken equipment that needed replacing. And on top of it all, the latest hospital notice for her brother, Ethan. The doctors were recommending a new treatment, but the cost was crushing $30,000 due within weeks. Clara stared at the number until the ink seemed to blur on the page. She felt the walls closing in. That's when the door opened without a knock. Victor Lane stepped inside, immaculate as always. His suit was perfectly tailored, his tie gleaming with some subtle sheen, his smile as polished as the marble floors in Cross's tower. But here, in the flickering fluorescent light of a failing community center, he looked like a wolf in a henhouse. Burning the midnight oil, Clara, he asked smoothly, though his tone carried no warmth. She looked up, startled. What do you want, Victor? He closed the door behind him, taking his time surveying the modest office with a mixture of disdain and amusement. Finally, he leaned against the desk close enough that Clara could smell the expensive cologne rolling off his skin. I heard about your brother, he said, lowering his voice. Tough break. A shame, really, that someone like you has to carry that burden alone. Clara stiffened. That's none of your business. Oh, but it could be, Victor replied, pulling a folder from under his arm. He laid it gently on the desk, sliding it toward her like a dealer passing a hand of cards. There's a discretionary fund in your budget. A loophole, if you will. With the right proposal, we can redirect $35,000 into a consulting account. No one will question it. Within 48 hours, that money can be in your personal account. Enough to take care of Ethan's treatment. Clara stared at the folder. The air felt heavier, pressing down on her chest. Victor's voice was silk. No one would know. Douglas Cross doesn't look at the details. He'll never miss it. Think of it as compensation. For your time, your effort, your sacrifice. Her eyes dropped to the pen on her desk. Her hand hovered over it, trembling. She thought of Ethan, pale and hooked to machines, telling her not to worry, telling her he'd be fine while both of them knew it was a lie. $30,000. The number pounded in her head like a drumbeat. Victor leaned closer, his whisper hot against the silence. Sign it, Clara. End the struggle. Be smart for once. The pen shook in her grip. A tear slipped down her cheek. For a fleeting, terrifying second, she wanted to give in. Then her phone buzzed. The name on the screen, Ethan. She answered with a broken whisper. Hey. His voice was weak but steady. Don't give up, sis. You always told me we don't take shortcuts. We fight. We keep our word. Clara's eyes squeezed shut, her throat tight. The pen slipped from her hand and clattered onto the desk. When she opened her eyes, her voice was cold steel. Get out. Victor's perfect smile faltered. Clara, don't be naive. I said, get out of my office. She snapped fists, clenched eyes blazing with fury. For the first time, the mask slipped. Victor's eyes hardened reptilian, his voice dropping to a hiss. You just made the biggest mistake of your life. I offered you salvation. Now you'll get destruction. He turned his polished shoes, echoing across the empty hall as he left. The doors shut with a final echoing thud. Clara sat back trembling, her heart racing. Shadows danced across the walls from the desk lamp, long and twisted. She realized with chilling certainty that the battle so far had only been skirmishes. The real war had just begun. 3 months into the Riverside project, Clara walked into the boardroom with her heart pounding, but her head held high. She had fought for every small win, the bakery ovens finally installed, children learning on borrowed laptops, volunteers rallying to keep the center alive. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And tonight, she was ready to prove that to Cross. The boardroom, however, already felt like a courtroom. The long, polished table gleamed under cold, fluorescent light. At the head sat Samuel Cross, his expression unreadable. Beside him stood Victor Lane, every hair in place, his tie flawless, his tablet glowing with quiet menace. Before Miss Morgan begins, Victor said, his voice silk stretched thin over a blade. There are irregularities we need to address. He tapped the screen. The wall lit up with the first slide, a wire transfer, then another, then another. Slide after slide of falsified invoices, bogus vendors, inflated expenses, all neatly arranged to tell a single story. That Clara Morgan, entrusted with $500,000, had siphoned off $35,000 into her own account. Whispers spread through the room like wildfire. Executives leaned closer, brows furrowed, some smirking with smug confirmation of what they already believed. Clara's blood ran cold. That's not true. Those aren't my transactions. Victor's voice cut over hers, calm, rehearsed, dripping with false sympathy. The numbers don't lie. It's all here. Transfers to an anonymous account, invoices from shell corporations. Right under our noses. He turned across with a look of sorrowful betrayal. She's been bleeding the project dry while pretending to save it. Clara stood frozen, her mouth dry. No, she whispered. No, you have to believe me. I never touched a dime. At the head of the table, Samuel Cross slowly rose to his feet. His face was carved from stone, the disappointment in his eyes sharper than rage. I gave you everything, he said quietly, but the words hit like thunder. A chance. My trust. A budget most executives never see. And you sold your soul for pocket change. Mr. Cross, please. Clara tried to step forward, but two security officers were already at her sides, their hands closing around her arms. You're finished here, Cross said coldly. Effective immediately. Legal will begin proceedings for termination, and we will explore criminal charges. The room blurred. Her voice broke. I didn't do this. He's lying. Victor's smirk was small-controlled, but Clara saw the glint of triumph in his eyes. She was marched out under the gaze of silent executives, their stares like daggers of judgment. No one defended her. No one spoke. By the time the elevator doors closed, Clara's fight had collapsed into a numb, hollow ache. Outside, the storm had returned. She stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching a cardboard box of her belongings, some notebooks, a photo of Ethan, a coffee mug she'd brought from the diner. The rain poured down, soaking her thin blazer, plastering her hair to her face. She didn't move. She couldn't. The skyscraper towered behind her, cold and merciless, its glass walls reflecting a city that didn't care whether she stood or fell. In that moment, Clara Morgan felt stripped bare, not just of her job, not just of her reputation, but of her very chance to make a difference. Her voice in memory or narration seemed to echo through the storm. She thought she had lost everything: her job, her reputation, her chance to save the community. And in the silence that followed, only the rain bore witness to her despair. For days after her dismissal, Clara drifted in a gray fog. The world had moved on, but she was frozen, her name tarnished, her reputation smeared. Even Riverside had begun to whisper. She stole the money, they said. She was just another fraud. All except for one voice, Margaret Hayes. The old director called her one evening, her tone steady as stone. I don't believe a word of it, Clara. Not for a second. If you've still got fight left in, you come back. We'll find the truth together. Clara hesitated. Part of her wanted to crawl away, to vanish. But when she thought of Ethan, of the children who came to the center, of the volunteers who had started to believe in her, the fog began to clear. She wasn't finished. Not yet. That's how the war room was born. In Margaret's cramped back office, a small army assembled Margaret herself, with her memory of every face and story in the community. Jason Kim, a quiet teenage coder from the after-school program, and Mr. Robert Ellis, a semi-retired accountant who still carried the meticulous habits that once got him pushed out of a big firm. The office filled with the glow of computer screens, the smell of stale coffee, and the tension of late nights turning into early mornings. Papers covered the desk. Handwritten notes clung to the walls. Their mission: expose Victor Lane. Jason worked the keys like a pianist, explaining in bursts of excitement. Every transaction on Cross's network requires a second authorization, something called the Cerberus Protocol. It logs everything: timestamps, locations, access routes. If Victor set Clara up, the system will know. Clara leaned over his shoulder, her heart pounding. Can you get into it? Jason shook his head. Not directly. But I can cross-reference the metadata from the financial logs. If Victor was outside the secure server when those transfers happened, we'll have him. Hours turned into nights. Coffee cups stacked high. Margaret dozed in a chair while Clara and Ellis pored over line after line of numbers. They hit wall after wall until the crack finally appeared. The damning transfer, the one Victor claimed Clara had orchestrated, was executed while he was in Geneva, giving a speech at a tech conference. There was proof, a time-stamped photo on social media, a dinner receipt from a lakeside restaurant 40 minutes later. The geography was impossible. Clara's pulse surged. He couldn't have been in Zurich authorizing that transfer if he was in Geneva at the same time. He faked it. He used a proxy. Ellis adjusted his glasses, his voice tight with awe. and the Cerberus log will show his true entry point. Once Cross sees this, Victor's house of cards collapses. They compiled everything into a single presentation stored on a plain USB stick. The weight of it in Clara's palm felt heavier than any weapon, but the real battle was getting it into the right hands. She knew where to find Cross. Every Tuesday evening, he dined alone at a discreet French restaurant in Soho. That's where she waited, nerves strung tighter than piano wire, rain once again streaking down the windows. When he finally stepped out, umbrella in hand, his eyes darkened at the sight of her. "I told security you were not to approach me again," he said coldly. Clara's voice trembled but didn't break. She held up the USB stick. "5 minutes. That's all I ask. If you still think I'm guilty after this, I'll disappear forever." For a long, terrible moment, silence stretched between them. Cross's jaw tightened. His instinct was to walk away. But curiosity, his one unshakable flaw, flickered in his eyes. He jerked his head toward the car. "Get in." The ride to his Park Avenue penthouse was suffocating. Neither spoke. When they arrived, he set the USB into his laptop, his expression grim as Clara stood behind him, heart pounding with each click. On the screen bloomed Jason's carefully prepared slides. The fraudulent invoices, the altered transfers, the Cerberus protocol logs with geotags, proving Victor could not have been in 2 places at once. Clara narrated each point, her voice steadier as the evidence unfolded. Cross's face remained stone, at first anger, then doubt, then something colder. But as the last log appeared, as the final contradiction burned on the screen, his eyes shifted. Slowly, the steel cracked, replaced by something he hadn't felt in a long time, realization. And in that moment, Samuel Cross was no longer looking at a thief. He was looking at the one person who had told him the truth from the very beginning. The confrontation came swiftly. Samuel Cross stood at the head of the boardroom table, Clara at his side, the USB stick resting between them like a final verdict. Victor Lane's smooth facade cracked the moment the Cerberus logs were displayed on the wall. For every polished denial he tried to offer, Cross countered with undeniable proof, timestamps, geotags, records no human hand could fake. The silence in the room was suffocating. When the last slide faded, Cross's voice was quiet but lethal. "Your access is revoked. Security will escort you from the building. If you're not out of the country in 24 hours, the evidence on my desk goes straight to the district attorney." Victor's eyes burned with venom. But the fight was over. He had underestimated her. He had underestimated all of them. And as he was led away, Clara felt no triumph, only a hollow release, the ache of a battle survived. Cross turned to her then, and for the first time, the cynicism in his eyes was gone. Only respect remained. "I was wrong about you," he said. "You weren't just the one person to return a wallet. You were the one person I couldn't buy. That's what this company needs." In the days that followed, Samuel Cross made good on his promise. He stripped away the rot Victor had left behind and breathed new life into the Riverside Project. A $10 million fund was established not as charity, but as the foundation for a new division, Cross Community Ventures. And at its head he placed Clara Morgan. The boardroom where she once stood, accused, now welcomed her as a leader. She didn't stand tall with pride. She stood steady with humility, her eyes glistening as she accepted the role. From waitress to director, not because of ambition, but because she refused to bend when it mattered most. Weeks later, Clara returned to where it had all begun. On the roadside diner, neon, still buzzing, booths still cracked. She slid into a corner seat, the same one Samuel Cross had once occupied, and watched a young waitress hurry past with tired eyes and a hopeful smile. When the bill came, Clara placed a $100 tip beneath the check. As the waitress picked it up stunned, Clara leaned closer and whispered softly, almost to herself, "It's not about the money. It's about what you choose when it matters." She rose, stepping out into the night where the rain had finally cleared. For the first time in years, the weight she carried felt lighter, her path ahead, not defined by circumstance, but by choice. Because integrity, she knew now, was the only currency that never loses value. If this story made you stop and think about the power of choices, share it with someone you care about. And if you'd like to hear more stories that remind us character is destiny, consider subscribing and leaving a comment about what integrity means to you.